Welcome to Interior Analysis. I'm Evan Westman,
I'm Jelani Kelly.
I'm David Jones.
and today we're talking about Beetlejuice. And we have a guest for this episode, host of the podcast My Favorite Movie Is. Welcome to Larry Freed.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. So, Larry, you wanted us to talk about Beetlejuice when I asked you to come on the show. So, I guess just why did you want to talk about this?
Just to give a little bit of context, on my show, I mean, the title kind of speaks for itself, but on my show, we talk about people's favorite films. And so when people ask me to come on their shows and they ask me to talk about my favorite films, I'm like, well, I can't talk about all of my favorite films because I have a podcast and I need to save a lot of the goodies for that one. But it does give me a great opportunity to go onto shows and talk about movies in different contexts that I just feel like I wouldn't get an opportunity to do on my show. My show is really all about talking to other people about the films that they love and how it's impacted them. And so I took this opportunity to talk about a film that I felt like, in my opinion, has really interesting and fascinating writing that I wouldn't maybe get a platform to talk about normally. And Beetlejuice has been a film for a few years now that I've just been really fascinated with from a writing perspective, because when you watch it for the first time, you're so absorbed in all of the visual elements of it and Burton's imagination and the performances and all of the iconic scenes, everything from the sandworms to Deo and everything. But as I make it a ritual to rewatch it every year around Halloween, and as I have been rewatching it over the years, I just feel like I notice new things in the writing every single time. Interesting character moments, moments of world building, how the settings juxtapose with each other, the commentaries that the film has on so many different things. And I just feel like this movie doesn't really get the credit it deserves. And I'm not saying it's one of the greatest screenplays ever written. Even I'm a huge fan of this film. It's one of my all-time favorites, and even I would agree that towards the end, it starts fraying a little bit. But there's so many things about this film that I think are so interesting and smart and poignant, and I just don't think that that's something that the film ever really gets talked about. Or rather, that's never part of the discussion of the film. Everybody's first to talk about a lot of other elements of it. And so I thought this was a good opportunity to sit down and really dive into the history of the film and the screenplay of the film and talk a little bit about, the writing behind this, I guess, technically cult classic, even though it's pretty widely beloved by a lot of people, I would say.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into some of the where you see there being commentary there, because I was kind of looking for that. This was my first time seeing it, and I was not really able to find that much, but I feel like there is stuff there that I missed. Why don't we go around, doesn't really matter the order, and just talk about how did we first see this? I think all of you have seen this before, right?
Yeah.
I'm the only one who's coming to it fresh. Okay. So yeah, any of you can jump in on that.
I guess I'll jump in. I don't know.
Sure.
Because I'm kind of in the hot seat. Even though, to be honest, I don't know if I remember the first time that I saw it, because it's been a film that I've loved for many, many years. But I remember I revisited the film one Halloween a number of years ago in sort of a Halloween movie month where I was watching a bunch of horror films. And this film is just so enjoyable. I had seen it many years prior, but I rewatched it and I was just struck by how funny it is, how weird and wacky it is, and how comfortable it is playing by its own rules in a sense, and asks you to sort of just jump in the line, so to speak, and just be like, okay, just go for it, just be prepared to dive into this world. The music is so memorable, the Belafonte soundtrack, and the visuals are unforgettable. And so it was just one of those films that showed me the power of filmmaking in a very different way. Just sort of how you can sort of take a story so crazy like this and really mold it into something so memorable and interesting and imaginative. And so I've revisited it for the last like 5 years every Halloween, sometimes more than that if I get the hankering for it. My friend got me the Blu-ray recently as a birthday present, and so I know I'm probably going to be revisiting it even more now because for some reason this movie isn't on any streaming platforms, which is a crime. Yeah, that's sort of how I came to discover my passion for it.
Do you remember the first time you saw Jelani?
Not really. I remember my dad showing it to me, and that was it. I didn't remember much from the movie other than the character of the movie is named after being a whack job. And also, didn't know the Lil Wayne song that he sampled this song. Didn't know that. The 6 foot, 7 foot song.
Yeah, Deo.
Yeah, that I didn't know the actual name of it. But yeah,
The Banana Boat song.
Yeah.
that one.
Is that famous from this movie? Because I remember
Yeah.
like I heard that as a kid, and I never knew it was associated with this. But of course, this has been around for years, longer than I have. So, or any of us, I guess. But like, do any of you know? Is that song known because of this movie?
It was like a situation where it was known before the movie, but when the movie came out, because it was a couple of years, like I think it might be 2 or so many decades before the actual movie came out, the movie kind of brought a new light to it. And it's just a really iconic scene from the movie, and the song's kind of lived on in that way. It got like a second life.
Absolutely.
So maybe kind of like Freebird with the church fight from Kingsman. Is that maybe a fair comparison?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, cool.
Yeah.
Or like Wayne's World with that one.
Oh,
Queen song.
yeah, Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
for
like
sure.
the one. For me, I don't know. I don't remember the first time I saw it. I think I had to have been like a child, and it had to have been through Blockbuster, and it had to have been because my parents were like, "Yo, this is a great movie," and I was like, "Okay." So I just was like, "I'll watch anything, right?" And that's what I did. And I remember being very weird, but I liked it. And then I hadn't seen it again until I watched it for this conversation. And it's very campy in a very nice way. I was very pleased. I wasn't sure. I was like, oh God, how are Jelani and Evan going to feel? I know they don't like camp. And this is like the highest form of camp. Like everything
I didn't
is
feel like the camp was that bad, honestly.
it's really well done.
Because it's all kind of pinned with these darker undertones and all this horror imagery that it's not like traditional camp. It has all these other elements sort of like mixed into it.
And I was surprised it was PG because
Unreal.
it was
There's an F-bomb in
Yeah,
it.
There-
unreal.
I watched it with my sister. Even she said it. This is PG. I was like, well, I guess. But Michael Keaton's performance is wild too. I forgot how they just let him go. Like he is off the handle and he's doing whatever he needs. And the improv is very good in my opinion. It's very of the time. I don't think that improv would be greenlit today, but it's very of the time.
I made a note while watching it saying how much coke was Michael Keaton on for this. Like, and I haven't seen I feel like most of what I've seen Michael Keaton do, he's more like low key, like Spotlight, Birdman kind of Michael Keaton. I know he has a reputation. Like, I know his Batman performance, he goes a little out there, but I haven't seen any of his Batman performance or like I don't know. Does he have any like? What are his other roles where he's like kind of insane like this?
Well, to be honest, Birdman kind of gets there at certain points. He like definitely goes off in Birdman and kind of has that like manic breakdown. Certainly not to the point of Beetlejuice levels. I don't think any Michael Keaton performance has ever reached this height. But I would say, if anything, Birdman, of what I've seen, Birdman comes the closest. There's one scene in the in the 1989 Batman where he sort of like gets a little crazy, but
oh yeah, you want to get nuts?
yeah, let's get nuts.
Let's get nuts.
And if you could believe it, he made Batman 3 years, I think, after he made Beetlejuice. Michael Keaton. 90s were a crazy decade for Michael Keaton.
I guess Birdman, now that I'm thinking of it, because I forgot he plays both Riggin and Birdman in that. I feel like that's kind of a meeting of low-key Michael Keaton and crazy Michael Keaton.
He also plays a Birdman in the MCU.
Right.
And a like deranged snowman in Jack Frost, which is a little bit close to Beetlejuice. It's too weird.
It's a very funny. That movie was a childhood movie for me, and it's still. I rewatched it not too long ago, and it's so weird. It's so freaking weird.
Shout out to my cousin Julie. She edited it. You're not going to listen to this, but good for
Oh,
you.
wow. Look at that.
Good for you. And, Winona Ryder, great. Catherine O'Hara, great. I loved Catherine O'Hara again in this one. And there was that guy who was like, he was always the fat guy in like the late 80s, early 90s movies. He was great. And yeah, I think it aged well, but you just have to watch it in the context of when it came out.
Well, too bad for all of us born in the 90s. I was also happy to see Ed Rooney in something else. I forget his actor's name, but the guy who plays Ed Rooney from Ferris Bueller. I mean, while we're on casting a little bit, it was weird to see Alec Baldwin so young, because I've never seen him in anything this old. He's always been like the boss or the, I don't know, senior management or SNL Trump for stuff that I've seen him in. It was really strange to see him playing like late 20s, not being like all gruff like he usually is. I didn't have like any other major initial reactions to it. Like before going into this, I knew the like say his name 3 times thing. I didn't know what happened. I was like, he appears if we say it 3 times. I think I may have caught like the last 3 minutes of it on TV one time at Halloween. So I always have kind of thought of it as a Halloween movie, but I knew it wasn't like totally horror. To be honest, I wish this wasn't the case, but I was pretty neutral on it. Maybe I can like gain an appreciation through this conversation, but I tend to like stuff with themes and character arcs, and I feel like maybe they're in there, but if they are, I didn't see them. I want to get into whether there are arcs in this or not, but we can save that for later. So Larry, you wanted to talk about the characters. Where do you want to start with that?
Well, I like all of the characters in this movie, and I mean, Evan, you talked about Alec Baldwin before. I love all of the actors in this movie and all of the performances that they're giving, but in terms of like the characters, from a screenwriting perspective, if you read like the script for Beetlejuice, like the most recent draft that's available online, there are a few versions of the script that are available. We can talk about that later, but the most revised version of it, when you read it, I just love the character descriptions in it. And it just felt like when you're reading the screenplay for it, and then when you're watching the film, these characters to me feel really well defined in a way that, not a lot of other. There are a lot of movies that will really go out of its way to try and define its characters very particularly, and will spend time to do that. And that is valuable, in certain cases. But there's something to be said about a movie that doesn't have time to really spend too much time, shoving the definitions down your throat. And all these characters feel incredibly defined the moment, like within the first few moments of meeting all of them. And in the screenplay, they have these really great descriptions. And I wanted to talk to them about them a little bit. So when Adam Maitland is introduced, he's the first character you see. There's a description in the script, basically that says like, oh, he's the easygoing citizen. Frank Capra used to make movies about him. That's how he's described in the screenplay. And for those who don't know, Frank Capra is one of the most prolific film directors of all time. He directed films like It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. And like, that is a bit of an inside joke, but at the same time, it's like, for those of you who know who Frank Capra is, that character is immediately clear to you. Like, everything about that character is there. And just from a writing perspective, something I take away from that is, don't be afraid to have fun when you're writing this screenplay. Like, don't be afraid to just like put some energy into it and like have some personality. And I think that screenplay having as much personality as it did rubbed off on the film and the characters. I think the actors were able to see the personality in the script and really work with that. When Delia's character is introduced in the screenplay, the description is relentlessly New York, relentlessly fashionable, and relentlessly thin. Totally self-assured. Like, that's a great description for a character. And then you watch Catherine O'Hara absolutely embody that character perfectly in that performance. It's like, we know immediately who Delia is. Like, there's that great music cue. She enters. Her look is like iconic. Like, all the fashion in the movie is great. And What I love so much about the characters is that there is depth to all of them, but the movie doesn't need to spend so much time dealing with them because it is a comedy, honestly, first and foremost. I've first seen this film as a comedy, first and foremost, not a horror film, even though there is a lot of horror elements in it. What really ties it together is the comedy. And so I personally find that all of these characters are incredibly well-defined and interesting. Purely through just who they are and the performances, you get a really good sense of that. But beyond just them being great in terms of performance, there are these details that are sort of like snuck into the writing that really paints a picture of like who these characters are. One of the very first scenes, Barbara Maitland is talking to Jane, the woman who's the real estate agent who's trying to sell their house, and she says like, oh, well, this house is really meant for somebody, like a couple with like a family. And like you see Barbara has this reaction to that, and she takes it really personally. And then when they're in the car driving to the hardware store, Adam makes a comment. He says, well, we could try again, like on this vacation, like with like a sexual connotation to it. So like without having to say it outright, you immediately get a sense of who the Maitlands are. They're this couple who want to have children but have been struggling to have children. And that is an element of this film that not a lot of people talk about at all. And it was a detail in particular that really struck me when I was revisiting the film. And I think it really helps to put them in the situation for their arc, which, Evan, if we're talking about character arcs, I think the Maitlands probably have the most arc out of any of the characters in the movie, because they have to learn what being a parent really means and what it means to support a child. It's like when you think about them in the beginning, they are just obsessed with this house. The house is kind of the child in a sense. They're constantly working on it. They're so obsessed with it. And then when they're thrown into disarray, they begin a relationship with Lydia, and they're forced to understand that in order, what being parents means, like supporting a child means, it's like going out of your comfort zone and like trying to support them and do things for them. And it's very subtle. Again, it's not a point that the movie really like drives home. But to me, when you rewatch it so many times and the comedy kind of wears off for you, and you can sort of see the finer details, there are a lot of character details, in my opinion, that are in the screenplay too. They're right in the writing that I think really gives these characters a lot of depth and intrigue that I don't think a lot of other comedies. I mean, obviously Beetlejuice is a horror comedy and has so much more, but even modern day comedies, I don't feel like they spend as much effort with character as this film does.
So I was looking for a potential like parenting arc with them from the beginning, when they have the couple of scenes that you mentioned where they kind of hint at, are they going to have a kid or not? So obviously that's a good setup for a potential arc. And I did see like, okay, if that's their arc, maybe it's completed at the end where they sort of adopt Lydia. I did kind of think that it was missing some steps in between, because, I mean, how late is it that they meet Lydia? It's around halfway through, maybe even later. Could be wrong about that, but I felt like it was kind of late. I mean, you're pointing to some things that I guess do signal some internal change, because I was kind of looking at it and I was like, I kind of think this is just external, where Lydia is like dissatisfied with her parents, and this couple maybe wants a kid, and now they have one. So I was like, all right, that feels like an arc. I don't know that any of them have gone through any internal change there. I don't know if any of you can change my mind on that. I was kind of looking for something like that. I think there are a couple moments you pointed to, Larry, but I did feel like, yes, there's an arc there, but I think it's not as fleshed out as it could be. Not to say that it needs to do that. It seems like kind of a secondary priority for the writers and for Tim Burton, but I was kind of looking for a little bit more there.
I don't see an arc for anybody. Taking characters from the beginning or when they appear at whatever point in this movie to the end, I don't really think there's much change for anybody, so I don't see there being any arcs. I can kind of see Evan's point, but
For me, I definitely see both points because I think that's why I'm like, you have to look at the movie for like the context of what it is. Like, I feel like to me, this movie is much more comedic and satirical than it is thematic and dramatic. So I think it allows itself to not follow those beats, and it just at some points it'll hit them. Like, it has the moments where like Barbara or whatever her name is tells Lydia, because Lydia's like, I want to die, and she's like, no. And I feel like, okay, that could have, that could have been a beat they flushed out in a later draft that really shown like that character arc for Lydia, going from someone who doesn't want to live with her family to someone who's like happy. But they show it in very campy ways to me, in like quick glances, like when she comes home and she dances. So I think the audience has to connect the dots, because he kind of is deciding to play with a style and his own voice. And it's kind of, he definitely wants to show off the claymation effects, which I was impressed by. I was like, this looks...
they're great.
I was like, this is pretty innovative, especially the first transition from like actual like helicopter footage into the claymation house. That was very smooth. So I definitely think there's like sprinklings of it there, but yeah, I don't think it was his main like thing he wanted to show off with this film.
Yeah, I'm not saying it needed to have arcs. I'm just saying I don't see it to the extent Evan was saying. There's much more focus on comedy, and I can't think of a comedy where the main focus are the character arcs or the story arcs or anything like that.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
That is true.
I can give you one counter example, and Jelani, I think we've talked about it, that you haven't seen it, is Groundhog Day. And granted, that's more of a dramedy, I would say, than like a flat-out comedy.
comedy first.
Yeah.
Comedy first. Maybe 21 Jump Street.
21 Jump Street, you could argue, has arcs, yeah.
Yeah, that's
I
a
think
good
if you
one.
go back, like Some Like It Hot, I think that has an arc. I think both the people in Some Like
Yeah,
It Hot have an
okay.
arc.
And therefore, I guess White Chicks has an arc, seeing as they're the same.
White Chicks is criminally underrated. But anyway, we're not here to talk about that movie.
Yes, but it, like, Some Like It Hot and White Chicks. David, I know you've seen it. Well, I don't know if you've seen White Chicks, but I know you've seen some.
Yeah, of course. My favorite, I have trash comedy standards. Like the Wayans brothers, that's my shit. We can cut all of this, but that's my shit. Like, I love
Like Scary Movie?
Scary Movie 1, Scary Movie 2,
Oh
White
my
Chicks, Lil
God,
Daddy,
that is
all of them.
not what I expected.
Haunted
from you.
House.
Oh
Haunted
my
House 2.
man!
Wow.
Really? They made a second one?
Yep.
He's just going down the filmography line, basically.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say right now. That's not what I expected
I'm
to hear
glad
from
we could
David
bring out
ever.
this transformation, this learning about each other through this choice.
Man.
Yeah, all the reveals.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that, like, I understand everywhere you're coming from, in the sense that, like, it's definitely not a pronounced thing in the movie. The movie is not being like, this is a story about parents learning to love a child. And, like, it's obviously much more interested in being this wacky, goofy story. Even though I would argue that there are some commentaries about... This is a bit more of a deeper cut discussion, because there's a little bit of context involved, but the idea of corporatizing communities, like farmland communities, like the ones that are featured in the film, and how the art and commerce intersect, I think, is kind of maybe what Burton was more interested in, because that takes a really big focus in the last third of the film, or really the last fourth. But I would say that, like, again, they're very subtle details, and I think that, like, whether or not they come together to form a fully cohesive thing, they still make for really fun characters, and characters that you want to follow, and stories that you want to watch. And with all of these details, seeing them interact is just really entertaining. One more thing I just want to mention, one other character beat that I love, is how Otho can see the supernatural in the beginning of the film. Like, there are a few moments where he's like, did you see something? Oh, I felt something there. And, like, it's initially kind of thrown out as like, oh, I don't know, like something, I don't know, like, whoa, that was weird, right? Ghosts. And then in the movie goes on, and Otho's like, oh, I'm a medium. I can communicate with the supernatural. And we're all like, okay, Otho.
Word?
Yeah. like there's no freaking way that this guy can kind of supernatural. And then he like successfully does the seance. And like when I first watched the movie, I was like, what the heck? How is this a thing? And then you realize it was like that from the very beginning. Otho always had that ability. He just needed to channel it in this way. So like again, it's like small little things like that just really are like, okay, this wasn't just written willy-nilly. Like somebody did think about these characters and try to establish these motivations and these elements of backstory, and it gives the film a little bit more depth that I just think that people don't talk about too often.
I will say, like, I think the characters are well constructed. What's making me solid on my statement that I don't think they have arcs is I don't see a change in behavior for any of them from start to end. But I thought the strongest thing about the character construction in this movie is that all of them feel like they come from different worlds. Like the couple that's there in the beginning feel like they're from, the community that it takes place in, like that sort of suburban town. And the New York types that come in later feel completely different. And then, of course, all the dead people and Beetlejuice feel totally different from everyone else. Part of it's like the hair, makeup, wardrobe for everyone.
Right.
Even the more normal people. Like, I don't know if it's like a stereotype, but we kind of get a sense of who they are just from looking at them. And later, when we get like the New York people coming into the house, like, first of all, they change everything about it. But it's a mark of good writing that they feel like they are from completely different backgrounds. And I think that's a trap that I sometimes fall into, is making everyone kind of feel like they're a little bit too much the same. And I think it's a strength of this that we get kind of a collision of maybe not ideologies, although I guess to an extent, because there's sort of the conflict over how do we want to treat this house. But that's, I think, something that is a good lesson to take from this in constructing characters.
It's very interesting hearing that script description, because when I was watching it this time, I really thought like the way it's being shot and the way it's being written and the way the first couple minutes of the film plays, it feels, I was like, if I'm a random, say 45, 50-year-old in 1980 and I just walked into the cinemas and I went to see this movie, I would think this is going to be like a Frank Capra movie. They're going to go and at the end they're going to have a kid and they're going to live happily ever after. And the movie in a weird way does it, but subverts it at the same time. And I think that's really impressive. I don't think it's to the point where all the sins are forgiven, because there's definitely some flaws where you're like, this is just a little too wacky at some points, but I think it knows that, and I think he leans into that with the spectacle and the claymation, and that's why, I don't know, it's very beloved to me. It's a good time.
The style definitely, I think, does cover some of that, and watching this more than 30 years out of context, some of it doesn't hit as well, but like even now you have a very unique look to it when they're in like the afterlife world in the house or whatever, or the miniature town. Like that definitely has a certain style to it. And I personally don't jam with it, but it is at least interesting to look at. Even if you're not as compelled by other things within the core story of it, you have something interesting to look at, which can cover a lot of sins for the right viewer, I think.
And it's like the little things, like in the beginning when like the wife, while she was still alive, she goes and she walks and she pulls the little blind down, and there's the annoying like neighbor, or who we find out to be a realtor, trying to sell the house. And that's very like classic Hollywood, that transition. It would be very play like, it would be that quick and it would kind of make no actual sense, but we wouldn't care because we're in story time and it's okay for us. And it's just little things like that I think once it gets super weird in the third act, I think it starts to, it runs off a little wild, but the first two acts, I think that you definitely see like some tightness between, or consistency between what the characters are doing and where they are, beyond just it being like a wacky comedy.
All right. Did we have more we wanted to say on character or characters?
Not really, but I will say the score, Danny Elfman went hard. That score was really good. I sat there
It's
enjoying the
incredible.
score so much.
The
It was
opening
phenomenal.
credits to me are like one of my favorite pieces in all of film. That melody will forever stay with me. I mean, it's a perfect project for Danny Elfman, and clearly he proved that.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of Danny Elfman, but I think he and Tim Burton are well paired in like a tonal sense.
Yeah, they collaborate a lot. But this one to me, because we talked about it when we did Spider-Man. Yeah,
Right, yeah, he does
Batman.
that as well.
He did do Batman.
We talked about it. We talked
Edward
about it with
Scissorhands.
Spider-Man. Edward Scissorhands. And I mean, I love Spider-Man. It's iconic. But like this one, I was dancing to it. Like he just,
So good.
Danny Elfman had like an energy in this one. I really enjoyed it.
There's one music cue where when they enter the when they go through the wall, they open the door, they go through the wall, and the green light comes in. This just soaring music cue. Oh, it's the green light like shines over them. The cinematography also in this movie is so great, and that's a perfect moment. Like that's another thing I love about this movie. Like you have people who are at the top tier of their ability. Tim Burton is one of the most visually, at least in this period, was one of the most visually imaginative directors out there. You have him with his vision. You have Bo Welch with the production design, absolutely just bringing his wacky energy. You have Danny Elfman bringing his wacky energy, and it all creates this like symphony of weird, bizarre choices that all somehow just sort of coalesce really well together.
Yeah, I feel like part of the like Halloween movie vibe from this is, I guess, in a way because it sort of feels like you're walking through like a Halloween party when
Yeah.
you're like in the afterlife. It just kind of feels like everyone's in costume, weird lighting, weird Danny Elfman music. It kind of just has that like you're either at a Halloween party or a Halloween store. I think even if you don't think everyone brought their A game, you can tell everyone is like on the same page with each other. Like we understand what we're going for. It's a good collaboration there. David, you wanted to bring up like some of the production stuff, and we're kind of already getting into that. So did you want to continue with it?
Sure. I found it interesting, especially as a writer, to see how these films evolve. And Beetlejuice is such a unique film in so many ways, and its tone is one of them. It's like a roller coaster, and it's not like even a normal roller coaster. It's like a Six Flags, like intense roller coaster that's just constantly flinging you around, but you enjoy it because it's like so weird. And I don't know. I do wonder if one day, maybe when he's older, he'll make like that Beetlejuice that's just like pure horror that he wrote. But I'm glad that he went the way he went and he kind of found the comedy and the humor, because if it is a similar story with like not being able to bear a child and everything, I think that could have been a little too depressing and somber. So I'm glad that there is some levity and they do eventually get to have their kid in Lydia beyond the grave, even if it is a little wacky in that way. And the second thing that like is very interesting to me, I always love when characters or actors are improving, and to read how much Michael Keaton improved. And like as a kid, I obviously didn't know what improv was, so I didn't think anything of it. Watching it now, it's so clear to me it's improv. Like he's like the genie, but he's a pervert and he's just going. And he's just off the rails, and I'm like, okay, this is and they just let him go. And to hear that he did that all in 2 weeks is pretty phenomenal, because I feel like what I think of and what a lot of people think of is Beetlejuice, and they think of Michael Keaton. So for him to have that impact with like that small percentage of like set time, it's pretty amazing and a testament to his part in this film.
Yeah, he's absolutely incredible in the film. And I mean, you talk about the genie, but like Robin Williams has tons of inappropriate takes for that film. Like when he was recording,
Yeah.
he like would go totally off the rails. And so like it totally makes sense to me as well that it's improv, even though I never really thought about that element of the film until I rewatched it for this discussion. And I mean, he's working on an energy. It's almost too good, because he's on a completely different level of energy, than everybody else in the film. And that's the reason it works. It's because he is an entirely different specimen, and nobody should feel comfortable. Like, if they had a character working with him in that energy, it just wouldn't have worked, because he has to be this like heightened weirdo pervert like character. It's just a perfect wacky energy to bring to a cast of characters who all are like so deeply in their characters. Like, I love that first scene where we meet them, where the Maitlands meet Beetlejuice. It's the most awkward, weird, like, but it's like a wonderful improv showcase for Michael Keaton. And I also, just to hop off, David, your comments about the script, the different scripts. For those who don't know, Beetlejuice was a very different film in its original draft. Wildly different, like A24 2020 horror movie different. The script was tossed around by a variety of different companies, and it was rewritten to have a more comedic tone to it. And so, like, eventually, Tim Burton managed to convince the Geffen company to sign on for it. And there are a few different drafts you can read online of the script, and I'm not going to say that Beetlejuice, the original version, should not have gotten to exist. I think, honestly, rereading that first draft, it would thrive today. It's the exact kind of crazy, like, truly cerebral and personal horror that, like, companies like A24 and Neon are, like, thriving on right now. So I think it would be great. But I will say that the film in its current form is so unique and special. And I think it's just a testament to how I think a lot of people, especially those who subscribe to like auteur theory, which is sort of the idea that like the director writer is like the king of the movie and it's his personal vision and 100% him. People who and then again, I'm not hating on people who subscribe to that theory. I think there are a lot of movies that make that theory really resonant. But movies like Beetlejuice, to me, prove that the writing process, movies get written at every stage of the process, and every element. It gets written when it gets written. It gets written when it's shot. It gets rewritten in the editing room, and everybody provides different things to the movie and to the script. You read the revised script, and it's still very different from the film. There are still like chunks of that production script that are still very different. The scenes are shifted around. Certain interactions are completely taken out. And it just goes to show that like it really was a group effort. Like there were a lot of people that brought their sensibilities to the film. And I find that most great films, there is that collaboration. You have to have multiple different voices in the room in order to distill your weird movie thing into the best possible version of itself. I don't know if Beetlejuice is currently the best version of itself. There are a couple of things I don't love about it, but I don't know if the movie could have been as memorable if it had not been messed around with and changed so much, especially in the screenwriting stage.
Just to follow up with the Michael Keaton improving thing, I thought this was a good role to allow for improv with, because I think there is I do some improv, and it's a lot of fun to do, but a lot of times when you're doing a scene, you kind of tend to lose the thread of it, and like it can be hilarious in the moment, but if you go to unpack it, you can tell there's not a lot of meaning there or a lot of intention. But I think the way that Beetlejuice as a character is set up, his whole thing is just to be unpredictable, and like they set him up as like you really don't want him on your side. Like there are ghosts and then there's him, like he's like the worst of the worst. So to just have Michael Keaton go off like that I think is a great character to do improv with, because he can go as insane as he wants, and it's basically like it's accomplishing what it needs to. It's smart to do it in that situation, but if you're kind of in a place where you want to get laughs or you want to get a reaction from like an unpredictable performer, there's places where that doesn't work. That I think sometimes I've kind of heard about this more than I've seen it, that like there's like a certain brand of comedy where it's just we're going to make a few situations and then just let the actors riff. And I feel like that's not a good way to go about improvising, because then all right, you might get a good scene out of that, but the story as a whole is probably going to get lost if you just leave it all up to that. Long story short, I think it was the right move to let him improv here.
I mean, you get some of the greatest lines in cinema, in my opinion, when you, in this movie, letting Michael Keaton improv. Sometimes, like in my daily life, I'll just go, "Attention, Kmart shoppers," and like those lines are just like forever ingrained into my film vocabulary. There's the moment where it's like, "Oh, why should we trust you?" He's like, "Well, I went to Juilliard. I attended the business
Seen
school.
The Exorcist 176 times. Just keeps getting funny.
It keeps getting funnier every single time I see it." And it's also just incredible. Like, I think it's crazy that he managed to improv all of this. I think like him and Robin Williams, like talking about the genie again, like it's an unreal level of performance. Again, I agree with your assessment, Evan, that it's the filmmakers made a really good call to sort of give him free reign and to go crazy, because I think it gives the film, and honestly, some people might think it's too silly to do it, but if you really analyze his performance, there's a lot of craft there, and you really I think it elevates the film a lot, the craft in his performance, honestly.
He's absurd and he's ridiculous, but it's never unintentional. And I think that's the fine line you have to walk when you're playing an absurd and ridiculous character. And I think he does it really well, especially because they allow him to have a comedic tone. It's like, if we did get the OG draft, I agree. I think it would work in the art house horror days that we live in, because it is much more abstract and mythology based, and it has a lot more to do in that kind of realm. And now this version, not to say it's family friendly, even though it is PG, but there is more of like an American cinema satire woven in, and now you can like put a family friendly movie into this because they're commenting on it, which is interesting. Because the only remaining topics I have is like the very weird pitched sequel that Michael Keaton didn't do, called Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian.
Honestly, good. Thank God.
Yep.
This movie did not warrant a sequel, and thank God they managed to make a musical adaptation and not screw it up. I don't know if we could get another weird adaptation of this story or a continuation.
Right. And at the time, like, I heard the musical adaptation was really good and everything, but I had been so long since I had seen it, so I was like, interesting, because I do like theater a lot. And now rewatching it, I'm like, oh, this would work perfectly on stage. The weird stuff that he's showing off, the amount of fun you could do with the set design and everything, the art department would go off, so it made perfect sense. And it has that kind of abstract structure to it. Like, it feels almost like Follies or Company, and how Sondheim would write like a story even though there isn't a plot.
Yeah, I saw the show 3 times. It's really great. And I kind of recommend, Evan, actually, that you find it online or something and listen to it, because a lot of the character arc issues that you have in the film, they're much more explicit with the character arcs, with the characters and the themes in the musical. They really tighten it up.
Well, I would hope so. That's what plays are for.
Yeah.
They're mostly dialogue, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but musicals are mostly song.
Yeah, musical theater is sort of, most of the character work is done in song, but
Yeah.
Story through song. Yeah.
The only topic I really wanted to get into, aside from the character arcs a little bit, was I thought this had a little bit of a world building problem. And maybe this is because I missed things because it was my first time, but I kind of thought we needed better established rules and limitations for like the world of the story. Like, we get a few lines that kind of hint at stuff. There's the line like, death is different for everyone, so it's like, okay, so maybe there's not super established rules for this. But then I kind of felt like we need to know what the specific rules for our 2 specific ghosts are, if that's the case. And I think, like, for the most part, it's not a problem. There's a few points where it feels like there's a lack of stakes. It's like, okay, they want to get their house back. It's kind of been taken over by this other group of people. They've completely remodeled the whole thing. But how does like that tie into their afterlife fate? Because we're kind of given indications that there's better versions of the afterlife and worse versions of it. And that doesn't seem to really get established well. And again, please let me know if I missed something, because I think that's very possible. But I felt like that was a place where I kind of was bumping on it and being like, I kind of wanted something a little more solid. So maybe that's just me not embracing like the type of weirdness that this is going for. Do you guys agree, disagree, counter examples?
For me, because I had this very exact thought, and it's probably just because, we had that education, so we know we've been wired to look at a movie a certain way. But I was like, okay, how are they going to do this? How are they going to explain to the audience that this is what's going down right now? Because this is some wackadoo stuff. This is some pretty out of the box shenanigans that are going down. And how are they gonna, and they give the little rules, and it's rules of the deceased, and that's very camp. And then he's like, rules of the deceased, and she's like, deceased, and he's like, deceased, and they just keep saying deceased, and it's like very camp. And then like they start reading it, and then they have the only rule they really need to establish for the film is, can people see them? And if they have the won't or can't, and they say most people won't, and that's their way of excusing Lydia and the other guy later on. But then she's trying to keep going through the book, and he like shuts it, and he's like, there's no point. And she like asks another question. He says something like, I think because like we're dead, there's no point to like da 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 da. And that's the line they kind of give to the audience to be like, all right, we finished this part, all right, we know the one rule we need, now let's continue. Because it's just such a fast movie, it's doing so much.
I would say that, I mean, Evan, I get what you're saying. I can't say that I agree with it. I'm not going to act like everything makes sense in the movie. The lines are not like drawn in the sand super well. Beetlejuice's rules of, coming in and out of the world and his abilities, it's not very well defined. But first of all, I sort of have a golden rule where that if a movie is funny, it can get away with basically anything. And that's largely how I feel about Beetlejuice and for a lot of my favorite comedies. When I'm in a theater and I'm watching a movie and I'm really enjoying it and I'm laughing a lot, I tend to excuse a lot of the problems that it has. And I think that's A, because I'm just having a good time, but B, because I feel like there are some movies where there's just sort of a tone and an understanding that there is no understanding. And I think Beetlejuice, at many, like, I agree with what David is saying. There are a lot of moments in Beetlejuice where it's just sort of asking you to play by their rules or lack thereof. And I think Beetlejuice as a character largely represents chaos. That's kind of what the film is. The film is this just unbridled just collection of moments that are chaos and Beetlejuice causing all of these things. I think that because Beetlejuice allows for all of this chaos to happen, there's less of a concern about the specifics of everything. Not even in Beetlejuice as a character, but also just like, again, like I agree with David's point about like the book for the recently deceased saying like, oh, most people like can or won't, or most people won't. There's definitely a sense of like everybody's sort of working on their own system, like it's a mixed bag of things. And I think that some people aren't gonna vibe with it. And I think that I think that people like me and David who really enjoyed the film and sort of we definitely sort of let our good feelings about the film melt into all of these other things about the film that maybe don't fully stand up, because the experience of the movie is just so much fun that the logic of it doesn't have to be ironclad. Because it's not ironclad and it's chaotic, we can have a little bit more fun with it.
I agree. And I also think like they want us to feel that way. Like I don't think it's that much of a stretch to think that was the intention behind it, because like a lot of the first jokes, like when they move in and they're talking about renovations and she hanged herself in like the closet, the joke is on them. It's her and the audience knowing they can't see her. It's like we're laughing at them, and it becomes this kind of weird meta movie where you and the filmmaker are kind of winking at each other, and we're looking at these characters together in a strange way. And it does that kind of really well. And I think that's why, like what Evan was saying, why Michael Keaton's improv works so well, because like you say, he's chaos. He's supposed to be just bombastic and absurd, and that's exactly what he is every second he's on screen.
I hear what you guys are saying about, like, I think it does work for the character of Beetlejuice specifically, because we have one specific rule with him: don't say his name 3 times or he's going to go nuts and cause all sorts of problems. That's something that is established. We see that it's true by the end.
Yeah, he's essentially like a Pandora's box. Do not open,
yes.
Do not touch. Once you do, all havoc will come out.
Yeah, and I think it's okay that we don't know specifically what he's going to do. And when we do meet him before he gets let out of the box, we see that he's got Joker logic. He doesn't know what he wants to do, but we know that whatever he ends up doing, it's going to be bad. So we've got like stakes and enough rules established there that I think that works. Where I think it doesn't is the other parts of this movie's afterlife. Like, there's very clearly some kind of natural laws governing it and sort of like bureaucratic rules that it's functioning under, but it's kind of vague. So like we have sort of an establishment of like people don't immediately know that they're dead when they die. There's the great running gag with the football team for that, and we have that established before, but then it's a little too vague with some of the other stuff where it needs to be a little more specific. Like, I think the can't or won't line, like that people won't notice ghosts, that works okay. But, we had the whole handbook there the whole time that's like, these people can learn the rules of like that they're functioning under. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of felt like they were just like, oh yeah, I got bored. I'm not gonna finish the book. And that's why we don't have the rules. I could have missed something there, but that's a place where they needed to improve their world building.
I don't know. I mean, you just said they sort of reject the book, right? So in a sense, that rejection of the book is sort of a rejection of a lot of like the logical like inconsistencies that you're talking about. Not to say that again, I can't tell you like it, like I can't, if it doesn't vibe with you, it won't. But I will say I think there is an intentionality there of sort of trying to get the audience to sort of evade all of that.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it needed like a scene of them reading it and establishing very specific rules, but you could have done something where, and it does elegantly weave in some limitations for the world, like that are built in, showing and not telling those limitations, but they also don't do it for everything that I think they need to. It's not a deal breaker. I think obviously a lot of people are able to enjoy it. Otherwise, I think it's definitely something that I personally bump on more than most people probably would, but it definitely did limit my ability to enjoy it. Partly that's a me problem, but partly they had some places they could have done better. All right, are we good to move to the boilerplate and wrap up then?
Sure.
All right, upcoming episodes, we have Steve Jobs, the Michael Fassbender. The Michael Fassbender, Aaron Sorkin, Danny Boyle one, not the one with Ashton Kutcher. I think it's still on Netflix, so if people want to check that out beforehand, that's where to go. You can check out our YouTube channel. We have our Patreon for $1 a month. We have merchandise on Zazzle. Our logo is by Kelsey Hendry. And we'll throw in all our Twitter handles and stuff. But Larry, where can people find your show? And, I know you've talked about it a little bit. Your title's pretty self-explanatory, but if you want to go ahead and plug that.
Yes, thank you, Evan. My name is Larry Freed. My podcast is called My Favorite Movie Is. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and on YouTube and Google and all those places. You can also follow the show on social media at MFMI Podcast. All the social handles, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're currently, at the time of this recording, we're on hiatus, but we will be back in the spring with a bunch of awesome new episodes and really look forward to you checking us out.
Yeah, and I'll say that if you thought we were a little too negative about Back to the Future, Larry has episodes on all 3 Back to the Future movies that are much more positive.
Oh, were you guys negative about Back to the Future?
We weren't negative, but we
I
did
felt
take
like
it to task
I was
on
the
some
only
things.
one who was nice.
Dang, man. Yeah, please go check out our Back to the Future episodes. Yeah, we got a
They
great
they
duology
didn't
of
flame
episodes.
it like they came at Raimi. They don't give Raimi an inch. Like,
No, but Raimi doesn't deserve
Never.
it. Back to the Future deserves some inches.
Never.
Regardless of how you felt about ours, I've listened to both of those episodes. They're really solid. Long story short, There's some great episodes on there. I've listened to everything that I've seen. I think there's a couple episodes that I've missed, but there's some really great stuff on there.
Thank you, sir.
Once again, that's my favorite movie is. I am on Twitter at Ev_West. The show is on Twitter at INTAnalysis18.
I'm on Twitter at Jelani T. Kelly and Instagram Jelani T. Kelly.
I'm just not on Twitter or Instagram, so just follow one of them or all of them, and I'm good. Leave me alone.
If I can plug, I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. I'm on Twitter at @Hey Larry_ on Twitter, and then I'm at _Hey Larry on Instagram.
All right, cool. We'll see you guys next time. And Larry, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Pleasure to be here.